What's up, everybody? What's up, MGTOW? So in this video, I'm going to be looking at inflation in relation to hypergamy, so people can kind of get an idea, since most people in MGTOW understand hypergamy and how it works. And Paul Proteus was famously known for saying hypergamy floats. But I think in other terms, we can look at it as men are sinking and not so much that hypergamy floats. And you can see that from in the picture here. We're going to say that hypergamy is the water level, and the boat that's floating on it is men and men's purchasing power. And if you look at inflation in that way, the value of products never changes, but your purchasing power can go up or down depending on the amount of money in circulation. So real quick, we're just going to look at a couple of things. First, we're just going to look at the definition of inflation. So I'm taking this from the wikipedia.org, the article on inflation. So it says here, in economics, inflation, or less frequently price inflation, is a general rise in the price level in an economy over a period of time. When the general price level rises, each unit of currency buys fewer goods and services. Consequently, inflation reflects a reduction in the purchasing power per unit of money. A loss of real value in the medium of exchange and unit of account within the economy. The opposite of inflation is deflation, a sustained decrease in the general price of goods and services. The common measure of inflation is the inflation rate, the annualized percentage of change in the general price index, usually the consumer price index over time. Now, I'm going to get to why the consumer price index might not be the best way to gauge inflation over time, but I'm going to read the next paragraph first. Economists believe that very high rates of inflation and hyperinflation are harmful and are caused by excessive growth of the money supply. Views on which factors determine low to moderate rates of inflation are varied. Low or moderate inflation may be attributed to fluctuations in real demand for goods and services or changes in available supplies, such as during scarcities. However, the consensus view is that long, sustained period of inflation is caused by money supply growing faster than the rate of economic growth. Inflation affects economies in various positive and negative ways. The negative effects of inflation include an increase in the opportunity cost of holding money, uncertainty over future inflation, which may discourage investment and savings, and if inflation were rapid enough, shortages of goods as consumers begin hoarding out of concern that prices will increase in the future. Now, they're saying the positive effects include reducing unemployment due to nominal wage rigidity, allowing the central bank more leeway in carrying out monetary policy, encouraging loans and investment instead of money hoarding, and avoiding the inefficiencies associated with deflation. Now, I will agree that, too much deflation is bad too, because if the products that people are producing, the value is so low that they can't make any money off of it, then they're going to stop producing the products. I can agree with that. And it possibly might reduce unemployment, but there's a question about what type of employment you're getting. I'll get to that in a second. And we can kind of see some of the real world effects of inflation right now, because we can see that people are being discouraged from saving, because obviously if your money's going to be worth less in the future, you want to spend it now rather than save it, because it's just going to be taxed away through inflation. And we've also been seeing shortages of goods as people start hoarding stuff out of concern that there's going to be more inflation. And this one right here, where they say it's encouraging loans, meaning debt, instead of money hoarding, meaning savings, which I don't see how that's a positive thing. All right, so when they're talking about the consumer price index, a lot of people disagree with the consumer price index rate, which basically is very low. And it's basically saying that inflation isn't really rising that much. But if we look at the definition of inflation, it's a rise in the price level in an economy over a period of time because of them printing money. So if I look at this article here from thestreet.com, and it's an article by MGTOW, and it's got charts. So, I mean, you can look at the charts yourself. But basically it's saying that 23.6% of all US dollars were created in 2020. So that would mean that there's a 22% increase in the money supply, which would mean that there's 22% inflation. Now, that's not entirely true because it has to do with the velocity of money and the fact that when the banks loan money to extremely rich people and businesses, they don't immediately put the money into circulation. So like, let's say the central bank loaned somebody $1 million. The inflation rate's not going to actually increase until they go and spend that $1 million into the economy. And then the next person that tries to use the money is going to feel the effects of the inflation because it's going to be worth less after the first person that gets it from the bank spends it. So now if we say that there's about a 22% increase in the money supply or 22% inflation, we can look at this article here, worldatwork.org, and they're talking about the wage growth percentage in North America, and they're saying that in North America, the average salary growth is predicted to be 2.8% in 2020, which is the same as in 2019. And then they're saying when adjusted for inflation, the real wage growth is expected to be 1.1%. So if there's a 22% increase in the money supply, and we'll even say there's a 2.8% increase in wages, that still means that you're getting around an 18% inflation due to the increase of the money supply in the system. So now, saying all that, you can kind of see just the basics of how inflation works and what it's doing to the economy. And this is only based on the money supply. So for instance, if you own assets, the asset prices are going up or they're maintaining the same value, and just the purchasing power of your fiat currency or dollars is going down. So it costs more dollars to buy the same thing. So now this is really going to affect people that don't own property, don't own assets like houses or say Picasso paintings or anything that appreciates in value. If all you have is cash and you're just holding cash, the cash is decreasing in value every year. And in fact, it's decreasing in value 22% just in 2020 alone. So now if we look at this picture, right, and you can imagine that the value of buying a woman, and now you can get mad at me for saying buying a woman, but I mean, that's when you have to pay for something, that's typically what you define it as. If I have to pay for something, I'm buying it. So the price to buy a woman is basically the same price. It doesn't change because the value of a female doesn't change, or the base level of female hypergamy or what women want the man to be able to provide for them doesn't change. But the amount of purchasing power that the man has does change due to inflation. So if we look at this, we can see that, the people that are at the bottom of the boat, when you start inflating the money, basically they're going to sink down underneath the level of the water, and they're going to be underwater, which is a financial term for being in debt or not having a lot of money, no liquidity, But in this case, they have a lot of liquidity because they're drowning under the inflation rate. So the people that have assets and stuff, they're kind of like at the top of the boat or whatever. So to them, it might be sinking a little bit, but they're not getting wet, so they don't care. And in fact, they might actually think it's a good thing because it's giving them more space on the boat maybe at this point. And, their rooms up at the top of the boat aren't getting wet, so they don't really care. And in fact, I would say that this is one of the major problems with the responsibilitism philosophy or political philosophy, because when you say only rich people can vote, it's pretty obvious that the first thing rich people are going to do is turn around and vote and make laws that make it harder for poor people to get rich so that they can vote. And we can see this with inflation because obviously somebody's voting for this. And if they're not voting for it, they're not stopping it from happening, because if they have assets, it's increasing the value of their assets. So anyway, we can kind of see how society's set up like this. And then you've got the people at the top, the captains of industry, whatever you want to call them. And sure, I don't have a problem with the best navigator navigating the boat and, having a higher position in the boat. But the problem is when the people at the top of the boat start building something on top of the boat, and in this case, we'll just call it a submarine, right? So they're building a submarine at the top of the boat, and they need everybody else on the boat to build the submarine for them, because they might be the smartest, most capable people in the boat, but they still need other people to help them build the submarine. So they're starting to build the submarine at the top, and then you can see that inflation is basically putting holes in the boat. It's putting holes in the boat. It's making the boat sink more and more and more over time. And at the same time, they're telling everybody, hey, help us build this submarine at the top of the boat. But there's not going to be enough space in the submarine for everybody on the boat, obviously, even including the people that are at the top who think that they're not getting wet because their rooms are still above water. And if you want to say, oh, this isn't happening, I mean, you can look at the Capitol building right now. Your tax money is paying for them to build a wall around the Capitol building and hire troops around the thing to protect them from them printing the money that's making you sink down lower and lower in your purchasing power. And they're getting afraid that people are actually realizing that this is happening. So they're building their submarine at the top to protect themselves from the sinking of the ship. So now, when you look at society, you don't really see that. But if you look at it in this form, and you see that you're building the submarine around these people, and they're sinking the boat's slowly sinking. It just keeps sinking with them printing more and more money, and it's sinking, and you're building the submarine, and it keeps sinking and sinking and sinking down, and more people are going underneath the level where it costs to actually buy into the system, to buy into women. And just sinking and sinking, and you're building the submarine, and then eventually it's going to sink down so low that everybody's going to be underwater except for the people in the submarine, because they have a submarine. So they don't care if it goes underwater because you just built them a submarine. So we can kind of see just from this graph or chart or whatever you want to call it, that inflation does affect people. And it's not just this casual thing that you should ignore. And now, granted, there are ways to hedge against it, like buying gold or silver or getting into stocks or cryptocurrencies, things like that, or possibly buying assets. But the problem is that with the wage growth compared to the growth of inflation, if you're a very low wage earner, it's going to be very hard for you to actually afford to buy assets that are going to appreciate in value. Because like if you work at McDonald's, the chances that you're going to be able to buy a Picasso painting or some type of sculpture or something that's going to appreciate in value over time is pretty low. And you're trying to keep up with inflation, which is 22%, and your wage growth is only 2%, so you're still losing 18% of your purchasing power. and everything's sinking and sinking and sinking and sinking, and the price of buying a woman stays the same because that's the water level. So as you go down and down and down, it becomes more difficult for you to buy into the thing. And then eventually, the only people that will be left are the people that you built the submarine for. So really, that's all I got to say on this one. Have a good day and go MGTOW.